Welcome to the podcast, Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. And I'm your host, Mike Allen. P.T. Barnum, his memory, his legacy, and keeping his spirit alive. Now, if Barnum was from your hometown, how do you think you would honor his bigger-than-life figure? Well, for the past 75 years, the city of Bridgeport's been keeping that flame alive around Barnum's memory by staging the incredible Barnum Festival. Now, today we're going to look at the man and his festival through the eyes of the person entrusted this year with keeping that flame going. Greg Gannett earned the position of ringmaster for the festival, meaning that he exemplifies the qualities of P.T. Barnum himself, particularly in this case with his charitable generosity. Barnum, of course, was amazing, and Gannett is larger than life in his own way in the field of charities. You're going to hear all about that, and he'll be along in just a moment. This week's trivia question: this person was one of the most notorious bootleggers in Connecticut during Prohibition, and she was a female. Who was she? Stick around after the main program for the answer, because then you're going to know the topic for next week's show. You might say that P.T. Barnum needs no introduction. After all, the most famous showman in history certainly left a legacy that we all still recall 150 years after his death. And yet, I promise you, you're going to learn a lot about the man in this episode that you never knew before. Some incredible institutions that he created or financed, and his generous soul that benefited his adopted hometown of Bridgeport. Now, Barnum's always been most widely identified, of course, with the Barnum and Bailey circus, but that was frankly just a project he started in retirement. Up until then, he loomed larger than life in many other ways, most notably at Barnum's American Museum in New York City. That's what made him the country's first millionaire and an international superstar. And yet he meant so much more to his hometown of Bridgeport in ways that many never saw. Now, residents of Bethel, of course, are going to bristle when I say that, because Barnum was actually born and raised in Bethel. But he left that town to go and make his fortune. But he always remained extremely fond of Bethel. He returned on several occasions for visits, and he always credited the people there with helping him learn the secrets of life and business that propelled him to his wild success. Now, today's episode also focuses on a festival. Not just any festival, mind you. It's the festival that's been around for 75 years and is focused squarely on Barnum. Now, you might be surprised to learn that the Barnum Festival originally was started to turn around the mood of a disparaging public by celebrating a man who, of course, spent his life making others laugh and be happy. This is a man who not only molded the city of Bridgeport into what it is today, but along the way he staged many events and projects to help its people. One great example, which people still talk about, involves the Stratford Avenue Bridge. It was rebuilt back in the 1880s using iron, and people were fearful that it couldn't support the weight that would pass over it. Barnum wintered his circus animals in Bridgeport, and so he got a dozen elephants and paraded them across the bridge to demonstrate it was perfectly safe as thousands looked on. And that's just the type of guy he was. In fact, he had done the same thing with elephants and camels on New York's Brooklyn Bridge, also to prove its sturdiness to a skeptical public. Well, being selected as the ringmaster for the Barnum Festival is no small thing. It's an honor that places you among the city's major benefactors, a role model type who gives as much as they get. And that description certainly applies to the man selected to be the 2025 ringmaster, Greg Gannett. Greg is a talented contractor, to be sure. He's developed a very successful business over the past several decades, but he's much more than that. He's got a devotion to helping others and his community in multiple ways, and you're going to hear all about that. In fact, it's been a central part of Gannett's life. In many ways, he emulates the best of P.T. Barnum himself. Greg, I want to tell you I'm very excited about this. I am such a P.T. Barnum fan. And, I've covered P.T. Barnum from two perspectives. Number one, from Bethel, where they claim him as their own because he was born there and raised there. But then he went out and he made his fame and fortune, and for that he lived in Bridgeport. And when you look at the legacy and the things he contributed to Bridgeport, it's hard to say anything other than Bridgeport was, in fact, his home. And when you look at this, I mean, you're now, the ringmaster for the Barnum Festival for 2025, which is, that's right at the pinnacle of P.T. Barnum remembrance at this point in time. When you look at Bridgeport, you think P.T. Barnum and you think of all the things he contributed. What are some of the standout items for you?
He brought so much to the city. He was the mayor in 1875. He had a museum. He was one of the starting founders of Bridgeport Hospital. He founded the Long Island Ferry. He founded local newspapers. He was an abolitionist. He was a public figure. He created Seaside Park, where his home originated. He just really touched the city. When you're out and about in Bridgeport, you can really see his influence. The biggest item left from his influence is the Barnum Museum, which screams P.T. Barnum. And of course, he's the crown jewel of Seaside Park with his 15, 20-foot statue of him, which stands proud.
It's interesting that you put it that way, his influence, because that's exactly right. When you drive around and you say, oh, there's Mountain View Cemetery. Oh, there's Seaside Park. Oh, there's even East Bridgeport. None of these things existed until he got there and put his stamp on it. So that's a real good way to put it. The argument about P.T. Barnum, about nobody can ever take away from him that he was the greatest marketer and genius marketer of that time. Some people will say, oh, but he took advantage of disabled people to make a buck, and he shouldn't have done that. And other people will point out that those people were paid extremely well and would not have had a very good life or an easy life without the kind of payment that P.T. Barnum made. Where do you come down on all that in terms of his legacy? Are we looking back in 2024 lenses at something that occurred, in the 19th century?
It seems to still be positive in the eyes of local people. He did create a lot of income for people that would not have had opportunity.
He died in the late 1800s, right? And it was probably 50, 60 years later that they decided to even have a Barnum Festival. Why the delay?
I'm not sure that his influence ever faded, but the whole reason for the festival was public morale boosting. After World War II, people came home. There was a lot of unemployment due to manufacturing that was created for the war. There was public despair, and people needed something to hold on to get community out and about. Herman Steinkraus, he was the president of Bridgeport Brass. He brought a bunch of community leaders together and created an event to just revive the history of P.T. Barnum, but in the name of bringing people out and getting them back to function as a normal society, which was a great influence on so many people's lives. As you're in Bridgeport, everyone remembers P.T. Barnum with the elephants on the bridge, the elephants going down Main Street. It's still a big influence and big event for people.
When I look around the state of Connecticut and I try to find something that's similar in terms of a festival that honors a person, I don't find that. I find festivals that will honor food, like a lobster festival, or, parades will have a grand marshal honoring somebody. But to actually have a festival that rallies around a single person, are you aware of any other in the state of Connecticut?
I am not. I mean, they do Christopher Columbus, but that's a more of an Italian themed event. But he's really the man. He was the ultimate showman, and it's a good person to mimic.
Now, neither you nor I guess thankfully, were around in 1949 for the kickoff event of this when they held the first Barnum Festival 75 years ago. But as a youngster, you grew up there and you went to this. Tell me about this. What is the impact on a youngster when you go to the Barnum Festival?
So the festival is many, many events, but some of the highlights are there's the Wingding Parade for the kids at Beardsley Zoo, which P.T. Barnum was part of founding. There's the Great Street Parade, which is still one of the biggest parades in the state, but back in the day, it was amazingly large. And It was larger than life, and the effort that went into that parade, I can remember we never missed a parade. My uncle would go out at 5 o'clock in the morning and find a spot for the family. It was a big event. Everyone had family picnics around it. They would bring the circus to town. They would bring a carnival to town. They would bring the Champions on Parade, which was the drum corps. They would have the Bridgeport Symphony playing for the fireworks. The fireworks were the biggest you've ever seen. We're trying to keep the tradition of those major events alive and keep the community aware of it. The biggest challenges of the festival is evolving into the times that we're in. Everyone is on the internet, everyone is on their phone, everyone lives in a virtual world where we're trying to get them out into a public community event. We're trying to reinvent the wheel to bring people back to a time where we hold so sacred in our childhood.
So when you talk about the Barnum Festival, I've read about you a little bit and I've noticed that this was actually sort of a dream of yours at one point in your life when suddenly you thought, someday I might like to be the ringmaster of the Barnum Festival. And one of the things I think that all these events have in common is you go to them, but you don't give a second thought to who actually sat down and organized this and came up with the blueprint for it. You just go and have fun. And I think that the Barnum Festival is a little bit different in that they highlight this one position, the ringmaster, to bring it all together and give you a lot of fanfare and that helps with the promotion a bit. Tell us about this sort of desire on your part to become this and what it meant to you to actually be named the ringmaster for 2025.
Well, growing up, it was always the who's who, and we were always excited to learn who's going to be the next ringmaster because it was always somebody larger than life or somebody that everybody knew in the community. I made a joke with a friend about 35 years ago saying, I just started my business and I said, I hope I'm successful enough someday to be a ringmaster. That was it. It got put away in the thought process, and we always participated in going to the events and enjoying ourselves. We started getting more active going to events when Peggy and I got together about 10 years ago. A longtime friend of ours who has been involved in the festival for 30 plus years was finally getting his opportunity to be ringmaster, and he invited Peggy and I to be part of it. And that was where it all began.
You are no stranger to doing civic good in the community. You do the Swim Across the Sound, Jam at the Dam. Tell us about those.
We developed a cancer fund through Swim Across the Sound in the name of our family. Cancer's been very prevalent in our family, so we work really hard. I lost my brother and both my parents to the disease, as well as my grandmother and a lot of relatives. So we work hard and we generate car shows and concerts, stuff to bring funds and community awareness to cancer. Jam at the Dam is strictly a fun event that my friend George Zawali and I worked on and created, and it's usually a country music festival in the summer. So we have fun with that. And then we do the car show for the Barnum Festival, which also includes a concert. It's the biggest car show around. We've had 600 cars. We've had concerts and carnivals as part of that. We have a food truck festival part of it. So we're very active in putting on events, and we've put on large events for many years for different causes over the years.
Now, Jam at the Dam is fun. One of the things that probably wasn't so much fun, you heard on, just like everybody else, on December 14th, 2012, about the mass shooting at the Sandy Hook Elementary School, and you heard something on the news that night that spurred you to do something remarkable. Could you tell us that story?
So I heard on the news that someone said there's 26 new stars in the sky. I'm a coppersmith. I'm a contractor and carpenter by trade, and as a hobby, I love doing copper work and making things out of copper. And I had just come up with a pattern to make these three-dimensional copper stars. When someone said that on the news, I went to sleep, And I woke up in the morning and it was just matter of fact, I'm going to make 26 stars in honor of these families. And I called my cousin Anthony, was the assistant fire chief at the time. Now he's the chief. And I said, Anthony, I dreamt this up and this is what I want to do. What do you think? And he said, whatever you want to do, cuz. So this was Sunday. I think it was Monday or Tuesday. I drove up to Sandy Hook. My cousin had to meet us in town to bring us into the firehouse because it was still an active scene. And we looked at the firehouse. I measured the roof and went home and started working. And that was our project. We did the first permanent memorial of the stars on the Sandy Hook Firehouse.
Which are just remarkable. And anybody who drives by the Sandy Hook Volunteer Fire Department and sees those stars on the roof, you are the person responsible for them. And so it's no real stretch, in my imagination at least, that the theme that you have picked for this year's Barnum Festival deals with children's charities. Can you explain that?
I've been a Shriner for most of my adult life. My father was a Shriner, and we do a lot with the Children's Hospital and raising money for the burn units and the children's prosthetics, and just basically working with children charities. And we also do a lot with Stratford PAL and Bridgeport PAL, which is the police athletic league. So it just was fitting that if I'm going to theme my year with something, my wife and I decided that children's charities was really our priority. We're going to work hard to raise money for several children's charities this year, and that's going to be our goal.
Well, I suspect that Barnum is smiling from his final resting place in the Mountain Grove Cemetery. It's a beautifully designed cemetery, and yes, another thing in Bridgeport that P.T. Barnum created himself. Well, that wraps up this episode of Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path. I want to thank our guest for today's program, Greg Gannett, ringmaster for the 2025 edition of the massive Barnum Festival in Bridgeport. The answer to this week's trivia question, the question was, this person was one of the most notorious bootleggers in Connecticut during Prohibition, and she was a female. Who was she? The answer, Nellie Green of East Haven. Next week on Amazing Tales CT, you're going to hear about the exploits of this opera singer turned rum runner during the Roaring '20s in Connecticut. Amazing Tales from Off and On Connecticut's Beaten Path is a production of True North Associates, LLC. This is Mike Allen. Be safe and please stay healthy.